All right, y'all. Welcome back to another week of the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold. I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And I have Dr. Lisa with me. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Hi, everyone. My pronouns are she, hers, too. I'm excited to be back for another episode. We've got some exciting stuff to talk to you about, and we are both sitting on our hands so as not to do too much of this so that we don't knock over the microphone. So,
Exactly. Exactly.
yes. All right. So, how
Well,
about we jump right in to phase one?
yeah, let's get into phase one because this has been getting my goat for months now as a small business owner, minority owned business, a woman owned business. Can y'all please help us? We love it when y'all reach out to us for our services, whether it is DEI work, whether it's evaluation and assessment work, which is Lisa's wheelhouse, maybe it's facilitation, you name it. The work itself is the easiest part of the process. But the back end procurement just it gives me headaches. And I'm constantly learning that it's kind of like when I was a kid, Lisa, where we had that toy where you're trying to put pegs in the right shape hole. You're trying to put like a square peg in a round hole type situation when you're trying to fit a small business into a large client's ecosystem, especially when it comes to finance. And so, given that, it is just the biggest headache because the procurement practices of most of our larger clients does not work for people like us. So I'll give you a great example. A smaller client had a smaller kind of a foundation type business model, and I was literally paid the second I logged off. I saw it transferred over into the business account when I get my little emails pop up, right? I have another organization I'm working with, which has a few zeros behind it, and it has taken almost an entire quarter to get paid. And they're not the only ones. And so, for us that run small businesses, I just, I'm tired, Lisa. I am tired of the rhetoric of wanting to work with us mismatching with processes that simply do not work
Right.
for
Right.
organizations like ours. Have you experienced that as well?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, particularly with more structured institutions like higher education, for example, they have such entrenched payment processes that, there's no negotiating, right? And even,
Mm,
excuse me, even with organizations that address the small business piece, they're like, well, we'll pay you within 30 days instead of 45 days, which is our usual thing. But 30 days isn't actually that helpful, right? When you have cash flow issues. And then the other thing that's interesting is I do also see this from other nonprofits where they're smaller themselves, right? And so they do struggle with cash flow. Certainly, I understand that. But they expect consultants to do the entire project, like months and months and months of work.
yeah,
And then they'll pay you in a lump sum at the conclusion, which is just mind blowing to me because it's like, well, how
mm,
do you think that I live, right? Like, I need to
right,
pay a mortgage and
right.
food and other bits and pieces. And if I had kids, I'd have expenses there. So, how can I go 9 months essentially free labor?
Yes,
I
yes.
don't understand that at all. It's like yeah, it's a complete mismatch, but I have seen that over and over and over again.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and then too, which you understand because I've worked on your projects and you've worked on my projects, and being very cognizant of making sure that your subcontractors are paid as well, because most small businesses don't need someone with specific expertise on a full-time payroll. You need them as project-based collaborators. And so, given that, of course, let's say it's the trickle down effect where Lisa has contracted me as a subcontractor to work on her project. Well, it's not fair for Lisa to have to try to pay me, if that's even possible, when she hasn't received payment for both of us. And so, I just really feel like it has become so much of a love-hate relationship, if you will, because usually those larger organizations do have larger budgets to be able to afford the services that we provide on a much grander scale, but not if you have to wait 3, 4, 5, 6 months for those payments. And on top of that, usually, because Lisa, we've run into this before, where not only is payment possibly at the end of the project, it's also at their satisfaction as well. So, are they satisfied with a report, for example, or are they satisfied with outcomes, which we've already probably told them you're not going to be able to measure any of that for maybe even years after we've concluded the project itself. And so, I think what really needs to happen is those larger organizations need to work with other consultants that specialize in this area, or at the very least, look through your database of vendors, talk to your vendors that are smaller, minority owned, woman owned, and find out how can you streamline the process so that you can make things better and easier for them, because you can't say that you want us to do business with you, but then the processes make it so difficult or almost impossible for us to seamlessly run our businesses. So we just choose not to. We just choose not to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to have
Mm-hmm.
to make that choice, but sometimes we
Yeah.
find ourselves there.
Yeah, and it's that incongruence between kind of stated, we would really like to work with a contractor or a consultant from a minority owned, woman owned, veteran owned business,
Mhm.
and then those processes that do not align. But I think the other piece is when we talk about small businesses, I don't
Mhm.
know the parameters, but I do know that small businesses can have hundreds of employees and still be considered a small business. You and I are small businesses,
Right.
like one person with with some people that we contract with. Like,
Sure.
so that is small.
That's
I would
right.
say like less than 10 people is small. I wouldn't, if I started to get to 20, 30 people even, I don't know that I would consider myself a small business. I mean, sure, that's small as compared to Microsoft, right?
Right.
But
Right.
that Microsoft is
Exactly.
gargantuan, right? But it just,
Mm.
how do we even define small? And then if you're thinking that a quote unquote small business that has 100 employees, they're not going to have any problem with cash flow and floating, payment to various
Mhm.
constituents. You're really limiting yourself because a lot of women owned and minority owned businesses are not that big, right?
That's
They're
right.
just not.
That's right. Exactly. Well, and then too, for me, we probably need to even query small business, right? Because I remember when you and I we had a text exchange right after the pandemic, and businesses were applying for these PPP loans, which I didn't even go into the details of because my business was not qualified for that. But what was interesting was that they mentioned small businesses were eligible to apply. Well, small, it can depend on the number of people that work in your organization, but it also can depend on the income. And so, for example, I remember reading an article about the LA Lakers being considered a small business and eligible to apply for a PPP loan. But then, as soon as they got called out for essentially not needing it, they returned it. Now, I don't know if they would have returned it without the pressure, but what I am saying is that we have to think about what a small business truly is and how they function. I'm sorry, but if you check me and Lisa's bank accounts, it's not going to function the way the LA Lakers bank accounts function, nor should they. We're all considered in the same pool if you're focusing on how the United States um, defines a small business. So I think, we need to get more critical on who really counts as a small business and what barriers they have when it comes to that cash flow issue, that floating issue. And even too, Lisa, thinking about um, when it comes to those employees, if you're a solopreneur or close to it, small business, that owner may be managing their own financial everything,
Right,
invoices,
right.
everything. Or they may contract out to someone. And so if that person they're contracting out to has to chase and chase and chase and chase money, you're slowly but surely eating away at the revenue that they already earned. So you're still, it's like a double whammy.
Yes, yes. Yeah, or if they charge a fee for having to pay directly into your bank account versus sending a check, right?
Ugh,
I
yes,
mean,
yes, yes, yes.
what are you doing there, right? Like Why?
Yeah, why? Why? Exactly, exactly. So, I think that the smaller businesses get sacrificed quite a bit in order to standardize a process that's not meant to be standardized when you compare small, mid-size, or large businesses. I mean, all the paperwork that I've ever filled out when it came to this type of work it made me feel like I should be like a contractor that's building a building on their property, not someone that's giving services, over maybe a couple of months. It just did not seem to fit. I'm like, my organization does not fit this model, but it seemed to be my only choice in order to get payment for what I'm clearly qualified to do. So it's just frustrating. I'll leave it there, Lisa. It's super frustrating.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this pod and you have some control over practices and the definition of small business and how small businesses get paid, then this is an equity issue, right? Like put your money where your mouth is and really make these opportunities accessible for organizations
Yes.
like us. But that is actually a great segue into our next phase, phase two, because Shaunna has been bugging me for some time to get myself registered as a woman owned business, both with the federal government and with the state of Colorado, right?
Hmm.
Which I still
Hmm.
haven't
That's
done it.
right. That's right. And how many years have you been in business, Lisa?
I know, right? It's really bad. But I did actually go to the website and look, and what blew me away, right? So, again, so these
Mm,
classifications are business classifications that exist to support minority owned businesses, women owned businesses, veteran owned businesses, businesses owned by folks with disabilities. There's a number of classifications, and the intention
mm,
is to create
mm.
opportunities for these organizations that have these classifications to get like local, state, and federal contracts, right?
Right.
And so I looked, and I'm not remembering which, but at the state level in Colorado and at the city of Denver level, there was a fee for some of those applications, right? And I can't remember what the
What?
fee was, but it wasn't insignificant. Like it wasn't $20. I think it was
Yeah.
over $100. It might even have been multiple hundreds of dollars.
Mm,
But I just remember thinking to myself, okay, so this whole process is designed to create opportunities for organizations that are run by people that have been historically excluded from local, state, and federal contracts. Might not have a lot of cash flow, see phase one that we just talked about, right? And you're going to charge me hundreds of dollars to apply for the classification. So you've just excluded a percentage of organizations that you're trying to help. Like, I don't even understand that.
ridiculous. Ridiculous. Well, and so Lisa, this is what, again, I'm not at the state level, so I don't quite understand it. But what I do know is that for the majority of folks that I know in other states that are also business owners, when they apply for the disadvantaged business, woman owned, et cetera, disadvantaged and or uh, how can I say, woman owned businesses, they weren't charged anything, and they also applied on a consolidated form that went through their Department of Transportation. So for me here in Maryland, it would be called MDOT, for example. And so given that, everything went through that. And what was interesting is that there were three check boxes at the top of my form. One was for disadvantaged business, one was for, I believe, woman-owned business, and then the other one was for if I had specific services that I wanted to provide at the airport, right? So to me, I'm thinking once again, what did I just say? Square peg, round hole type thing. Again, we're trying to fit everyone. And I see once again what the state is trying to do. They're saying, let's streamline this so everything can be all in one place for all types of identity groups that own businesses and put it here. I get that. But at the same time, I'm like, if I had to pay for that, thank goodness it was free in Maryland. If I had to pay for that, I just simply would not do it. And it took me what I started in 2016 and I just applied this year to get mine as well. I would have never done it. If it was a fee involved, I would have never done it because, yes, I want access to the opportunity to do business in the state. And Lisa, you and I, we've responded to RFPs that gave, for example, extra consideration and points if you had this certification in your home state, even though the business, the work may be elsewhere. We do it for those reasons. But if it was solely to access business in my state, and I don't even know if it's going to be what I do based on my code, mm, that's not an insignificant amount of money. Like
Right.
$100 or less, if not free, in my opinion. $100
Yeah.
or less, no
But then
more.
what are you charging for, right? Like it feels like a fee just to have a
Right.
fee.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think
yeah.
it was Denver. I think it was the city of Denver. I think the state of Colorado also went through the Department of Transportation, which is also very confusing to me. Why would I need to get registered for the state as a
Right,
woman-owned business through CDOT? Like I don't get that. But I didn't
right.
dig into the reasons for it, but it just seemed odd. But
Yeah.
the other thing was the applications are long and convoluted too, right? Like I understand you need to demonstrate in some way and provide evidence of your status. Like I think that's fine, right? But then again, like really I have to pay and it's
Mhm.
not a quick application. Oh, and PS it'll take us 6 months to approve that. I don't know what the timeline is, but I can only imagine it's
Yeah.
probably like not a quick process, right?
Mm-mm, mm-mm. So, all right, Lisa, I'm going to, at the risk of flashing back through all the documents that I had to attach. So, the first thing I did was download the MDOT form that tells you, here's your checklist of things that you need to do. Fill out this form, but you also have a checklist. So I did that in the PDF, right? It was one of those PDFs you could fill things into, that type of thing, which I did. I went to the website thinking, yay, I filled out the form. All I should have to do is upload the PDF I just filled out, put the attachments in, boom, we're in business, right? Oh, this was just like applying for a job, where you fill out the form and then you have to turn around and put it in the fields again. I had to put it in the fields again. So that was the first problem. And then after that, the attachments that were listed on the form, like let's say, for example, which it was a lot of them, let's say there were 10 attachments listed on the form. When I got into the online application, there were 15 to 17 attachments in the online form. So it's this iterative process that takes forever. If you've had your business for a while, I'm sorry, but exactly how do I prove that I paid for or invested in my business? Like, how do you prove that? Literally, the only thing I had to do, and it's even part of my history statement for my business plan, I literally bought a $10 pack of business cards when I got a coupon from Vistaprint and started my speaking service before I rolled it out into everything else that I do. Prove that exactly. Like, how do you prove that? I don't know. And then they ask for like personal net worth and all these other things. Oh my gosh. And I feel like we're being punished, Lisa, for the people who try to claim this eligibility for certification that really should not be there.
Right.
That's what I've concluded.
Yeah, so someone like tried to fix the system, and so then the system responds to address that one or two people that are bad actors, and then everyone else has to suffer. I mean, I see that a
Exactly.
lot. State administration, city administration is totally like that. So it does it. So it follows then that the application for small business, minority owned business designation would do that. But again, per our phase one conversation, you have like put all these barriers in the way of organizations that you are intending to help and create equity and access for, and yet your whole infrastructure and system is so bureaucratic
That's right.
that
That's right.
you have basically you're sending people running the other direction. Because the other piece to consider, right, for folks who haven't really thought about these issues before is very small businesses like Shaunna and I,
Mhm.
when we aren't doing billable work, we are not getting paid, right? So if it takes me
Exactly.
3 hours to apply for the woman-owned business designation, then that's 3 hours of lost income,
That's
right?
right.
And
That's right.
that's the
That's
piece that
right.
I think is completely misunderstood. Like we don't have the infrastructure to do all of this quote unquote non-billable time like a much larger
That's right.
organization does.
That's right.
So
That's right.
yeah, it's just
That's right.
shocking to me. Like I feel like these things should be self-evident if you are trying to increase equity, and yet they
Exactly.
are not.
They're not. They're not. Lisa, how many times have you and I texted one another and said, "Hey, I worked all day and I have like one billable hour to show for it, but I worked all day though, right?" That's our usual, and we're not saying that we shouldn't make residual income at some point, in our careers or even as we grow or expand our businesses. But for those of us who are in the middle, we're clearly fending for ourselves. Thank God we can pay mortgages, pay bills, feed ourselves, etc. But at the same time, we're not getting what's called mailbox money yet. We're not getting passive income yet, which means that we need to make the best of the hours that we have to work. And to your point, Lisa, I'm thinking 3 hours to fill out the application. I don't even want to count how many hours it's taken me to fill out that whole application. Even with some of the attachments, having to print out your statement of your personal net worth or some attachment, taking it to your bank or somewhere else because it has to be notarized before you can then upload it into. All of that is hours that you can't hand off to someone else, even if you are like the CEO of your company. You still have to sign it, get it notarized in front of someone, all those different things. It's literally missing the point. It's missing the whole point of the process. It's a shame.
Yeah.
It's a shame.
Okay, okay. You just made me think of that one state organization that
Mhm.
required applicants for their proposal process to print out 9 copies of the application and mail or hand deliver them, right? Like,
Ridiculous. Ridiculous.
absolutely unbelievable. They would not accept an email with an attachment. I
No.
mean, not only is that just disastrous in terms of like the amount of paper that you're wasting, because
Right.
what's going to happen to those proposals, right? They're going to get shredded or whatever. It's like just ridiculous. Like, how are you not? You're asking for a DEI consultant, and you're like the delivery of the proposal excludes a shit ton of people.
Hello. Exactly. To your point, so check this out, y'all. Y'all wish we could give you more details, but let's just give you the inequitable details just about submission. Looking for a DEI consultant. If you want to submit your proposal, which had lots of forms and addenda and so forth, which meant it was going to be a pretty large proposal, they wanted 9 copies of the proposal, as Dr. Lisa mentioned. But then, if you didn't get the actual contract, you had to pay for them to send them back to you or pay to have them shredded. Either way, you paid. Like, you mean to tell me I haven't made a brown penny off of any of this process yet, and I have to pay for my documents going and coming? I got to pay for my documents going and coming. It was the most
Yeah,
ridiculous RFP I have ever seen.
I
And
forgot
even
about
when
that.
we asked, you remember we actually asked, would they take, and we pointed out how inequitable it was. And Lisa, you'll be proud to know, I think there was like a cover letter where people who chose not to respond could give reasons why they chose not to respond. Y'all want to read that dissertation I wrote on why we didn't want to respond? The chipping of the hard copies was just one of many problems with that process. But I think you're exactly right. I had almost forgotten about that. It's the pro reading this process like, oh, it's clear why you need a DEI consultant because you don't even see what's problematic about getting a DEI consultant through this
Yeah.
process.
Yeah, and they
Ugh.
wanted a small business or they wanted a woman-owned, minority-owned business, right? They wanted, and you're like, "Oh my goodness." Right? Wow. Wow.
Been thinking, I thought about this too, Lisa. Even if you and I were consultants that were literally across the street from potential
Mhm.
client, for printing alone
Yes.
was going to cost a
Yeah.
ridiculous amount of money, not even the shipping and so forth, in addition to, the tolls on the
Right.
environment and everything else. I'm like, y'all are missing the point.
Yeah.
You're missing the point. Missing the point. So, needless to say, we didn't go after that one, Lisa.
We did not. We did not. So, the trials and
Oh,
tribulations of the disconnect between here we're creating these processes to be more equitable, but at the same time the processes are not equitable.
exactly. And then we, as the consultants who clearly see the problem, we come off as the hard-nosed assholes before we even
Yeah.
get in the door because we have to. It's the power dynamic of yes,
Yeah.
we want to be considered,
Yes.
and we're proving our expertise by critiquing your
Right.
process while we still want to be hired for the job.
Yeah. Yeah. They didn't
So
want to hear it. They didn't want to hear
nah, they
it.
weren't trying to hear it. Mm-mm, absolutely. Well, look, let me talk to you about this. This is my proposed phase 3 for this episode. I've been toying around with this because I had a great conversation with someone recently that was basically seeking some executive coaching. And this wonderful person does great work. And what was interesting was that this person is really between a rock and a hard place financially, despite, having multiple graduate degrees, one of few minorities in their field, all of that. And what was interesting was, when you get into coaching, one of the first things that you ask is number one, where would you like to start so that they can start sharing your pain points with you? And then the second piece is what have you attempted thus far and how has it worked for you? Right. And this person talked about some of their financial struggles in connection with their really focused and clear career, but yet at the same time talked about quite beautifully, actually, talked about their passion project and how much they care about this particular nonprofit organization, et cetera. And I'm sitting there listening to this person. This person was in a number of different minority groups. I'm not going to name them because I don't want to identify the individual. But what struck me was that overwhelmingly, I see the give, 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 give that comes from minoritized folks, women, people of color, folks that literally don't have it to give, yet they place this, it's kind of like this martyrdom feeling where you have to give even though I don't even have it to give. And I just find it fascinating. Lisa, you know, when I'm trying to kind of mentally relax after a day of doing all the DEI stuff, I watch my favorite Food Network shows and competitions and everything. I love Chopped. Everybody that knows me knows I love Chopped. And I saw the same thing, unrelated, in that show where the majority of folks that were minorities, women, etc., the first thing they said they would do with the earnings, which I think is like $10,000, $15,000, is to give it away. I'm pouring it back into my nonprofit. I'm giving it to a charity down the street. I'm giving it to whomever, whatever group. And as much as I salute and I feel like that is so admirable, at the same time, some fucked up shit, y'all, because you can't give what you don't yet have. And so, how can we sit here and talk about it's tough to pay the bills, but yet at the same time, you give, 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 give? It's almost as if for us, Lisa, for women, people of color, etc., it's almost like shame on you for wanting to earn money, take care of yourself and your family, and that's it. Like you're almost the villain if you don't give some of your earnings away. See them do that to white men. I don't see them doing that to men at all. I just don't see it, Lisa. And it's been rubbing me the wrong way because I am that person that would literally give the shirt off my back. But I'm also at a place in my mentality of saying the more I earn, the more I can choose what I give or not. It's my choice. If I want to give, I will. If I don't, I won't. But I'm not going to like succumb to the pressure. This person I was talking to was succumbing to the pressure. And it sucks. It just, ugh, soapbox for me. Soapbox.
Yeah, it's that pay it forward, right? Like paying it forward is not a bad thing. It's a great thing. And yet, who are the people primarily taking on that philosophy of paying it forward? This isn't obviously universally true, but certainly in my experience, it is the people who have experienced some kind of oppression in their life or have really struggled to make it that feel that extra desire, commitment, obligation to pay it forward, pay back to the community, contribute in some way. And yeah, it subjugates their own kind of basic financial needs for the good of everyone. And that is idolized in our culture, right? Like, you're such a great person. What a good thing that you've done.
Oh,
So
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
behavior is encouraged. Because if that person is like, you know what? I'm not going to donate to any charities this year, or I'm not going to feed this prize winning or speaker fee back into X, Y, and Z because I need a nest egg for myself, right? I want to put this into my own savings account. Then there's a little bit of a side eye that happens, right? Depending on the communities in which you're in. And I think that experience, yeah, is disproportionately women, folks of color, disabled people that have that experience. That's not to say that white, cisgender, hetero, able bodied men don't also experience that
Right.
pressure, but I think to a much lesser degree.
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
right, and it's exhausting, right?
It is exhausting. It is, and I've heard, especially that's one of the things that I really love about, thank goodness, the situation that we're in. So y'all hear about me talk about my sons all the time and how Kendrick, my youngest, wants to be a professional athlete. He is in a situation where, unlike, a lot of the guys that have gone pro, if you ever watched ESPN 30 for 30 Broke, that's the best episode I've ever seen ever, where it talks about professional athletes that came into large sums of money and to that very point went back to the martyrdom of things. Like, let me go back to the corner boy that was selling dope in my neighborhood who slid me a few bucks to buy my first pair of cleats for football and let me go buy him a house and maintain him for the rest of his life. That's literally what was happening. And fortunately, my kids will owe no one, if they choose to go that route. But that piece of feeling beholden, because if it wasn't for that dope boy on the corner that gave me the money for my cleats, I would have never even thought about going to NFL, NBA, what have you. It's that extra burden and the, how can I say, the community, the context, the ecosystem that both idolizes it and then shames you if you don't. How dare you be well off? How dare you have a nest egg? How dare you be comfortable when someone else isn't? And I'm like, hold up now, wait a minute. Unless you were sitting up here writing these 3,000 page proposals like me and Lisa have been to make money, then you don't get to determine where we spend our money, right? And so I just think it's frustrating, it's sad, it's obnoxious, it's not equitable because it's different when you have newer money. But I noticed it in this conversation and I just thought it deserves some attention because I
Mm-hmm.
feel this person and I understand what it
Yeah.
feels like to have a passion project that you want to fully fund, but yet at the same time, you're trying to figure out where you're going to get your next meal from. Now we're getting into prioritizing
Right.
taking care of yourself versus the idolizing piece that you were talking about before. And it takes a little bit of time to not care what people think. But
Yeah.
even just having to play those mental gymnastics of thinking about it, it's heavy.
Yeah, and that this individual is struggling financially, and maybe struggling is too strong of a word, but certainly is
Mhm,
concerned about the financials because she's putting the work into this really important nonprofit. Like
mhm.
that that's really sad to me, right? That her
Yeah,
passion is so important to her, as passion should be, I suppose, but to the detriment then of kind of all of the other pieces of her life that would lead to stability,
yeah,
that
yeah.
would enable her ultimately to grow the nonprofit, right? So it's like a
Mm,
cycle. It like
mm,
feeds one thing feeds the other. And then you have this overlay, this cultural overlay around judgment or not about what you're doing, right? Oh, you're so great. Look at you doing this really great thing. What a good person,
yeah,
right? And that also feeds the
yeah.
ego. I mean, this it's certainly nice to hear that. And so then you keep doing that, but then your other aspects of your life might suffer, but it's pretty complicated. And then when you think about people who have not historically had access to wealth, right? There's not generational wealth. They have been
That's right.
excluded in a variety of different ways. I mean, shit,
Yeah,
like women couldn't have bank accounts, right?
that's right.
Up
That's
until a
right.
certain point, like they had to have husbands co-sign, right? So then you
Hmm.
think about for the
Yeah.
generation of people where that shifted, where they went from not being able to being able to have a bank account, like
Hmm.
how did that impact their assessment of money, value, savings, giving back to the community, judgment
That's right.
around the fact that if they did start to accrue wealth, you know, what did that look like?
That's right. That's right. Well, something that popped in my head, Lisa, that I know we don't have time to flesh out in this episode, but something that we need to think about because you brought this to my attention months and months ago about the nonprofit starvation cycle that organizations kind of get into this spin cycle that they can't get out of. I'm wondering, especially because a lot of nonprofit leaders are overwhelmingly women and people of color, are we not doing the very same thing on a personal level? that we're putting ourselves into this
Right.
nonprofit leader
Yeah.
starvation cycle where I only have $100 to my name
Mhm.
for the
Mhm.
next 3 weeks, but they need XYZ at the nonprofit office, so I will do without for them to have XYZ. That is a
Yeah.
very real sentiment.
Yeah, that connection, like the personal to the organizational, how that is happening, and then how that's just
Hmm.
reinforced by our culture, right?
Hmm.
Um, and
Yeah,
this idea that to spend any of that money on yourself that you're earning is bad, right? Like
right,
that's not
right,
okay to spend it on
right.
yourself because there are people that need it. Um,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I don't. That's a learned. It's a learned behavior. Like that's not. That's our culture doing that, isn't it? Um,
Oh yes,
well,
oh yes. Well, and then let me throw one more extra credit piece in here that I'm thinking
all
about,
right.
Lisa, is that when I think about especially people of color, especially Protestant Christian people of color, that's where a lot of theology comes in and creeps into how we manage that. Or will always be among us. That's part of scripture. And so the question is, how do you respond to that? Is it the we don't want to make it seem like, oh, the poor will always be among us, so it's no need to do anything because they'll just always be here. Versus they're always among us, so what are we going to do in order to make sure that we are taken care of and we are not poor in spirit by actually caring that there are others that unfortunately live in a place and space where they can't provide for themselves. Both and I think what's the word, Lisa? Exploitation. That's our favorite word. We're going to get like a hoodie with
Yes.
exploitation on it because
Yep.
I
Yep.
think that is another layer of the religious exploitation of you're not a good Christian unless you give this amount of money to XYZ.
Oh,
And
right. Right.
and I am very big as a Christian. I am very big on tithing. I give to small churches, large churches, the ones that align with my values. But at the same time, that money is not walking out the door if these two little boys aren't fed either. And it's a cycle of sowing and reaping that I personally believe in as part of my faith. But if you don't have something to sow, then you can't reap, which means that nobody eats.
Yeah.
That's what makes sense to me. But I think the religious exploitation piece adds yet another layer onto
Yes.
all of what we've already talked about. So
Yeah. Yeah.
well, I was like weeping inside as I was listening to this
Mm.
story, but yet at the same time, I know that it's going to be a learning process because I know what it feels like to have passion around a particular thing that you
Yeah.
know will never make enough money to pay the bills. Nonprofit work is not necessarily created to pay your bills like that or to make you
Right.
affluent. So, uh,
No, and yet the expectation is that, or not I think there's an expectation, but the reality is that, yeah, as you had said, nonprofit work is primarily done by women, folks of color, disabled people,
hmm,
people who have been harmed in some way and are trying to right those wrongs so that that harm doesn't
that's right.
continue, right? And yet
That's
it's
right.
like underpaid, under resourced, not valued. And so then that spiral continues. So, all right.
Absolutely.
Well, on that happy note, I think we will wrap up for this week. Hopefully, phases one, two, and three gave you some food for thoughts you can think about. We were
Yeah.
excited to have this discussion this week. So, Dr. Shaunna, where can folks find us?
Oh goodness, they can find us a lot of places. They can find us on YouTube at Unfazed, Unedited. If you search for those words, you will find us there. And it's pretty cool that it does provide the transcript as well in YouTube. So that's pretty cool, especially if you're looking for some words or some concepts there. You can find us on Instagram, Unfazed Pod. We're still there. We've been there for, gosh, a couple years now. Find us on LinkedIn, Unfazed Pod. And of course, if you have a question or something you would like for us to answer, email us at info@unfazedpodcast.com. We like to hear what you have to say. And of course, if you just want to peruse, go back and look at the archives that we have and pick a topic to listen to. You can find that at www.unfazedpodcast.com, where you can access everything, old, new, you name it, will
Mm-hmm.
always be there. Okay. So hopefully you liked this week's episode. We were hard on the businesses and
We
nonprofits and
were.
so
Yeah,
forth.
we did go hard on that, didn't we?
We did, we did. So if you liked this episode, please like it, subscribe to the Unfazed podcast, leave a review, and share with your friends, coworkers, others in this particular phase of your life. So we'll see you next week.
See you next week.